Hi everyone, just going to wait a few minutes to allow people to join us. So I can see people now coming in. I know on Tuesday's session we had about 140 attending, so we're up to 34 at the moment. So I'm just going to wait a few minutes. It's nice to see the numbers building up. So I don't know how many of you were here for Tuesday's session. Unfortunately, I had to give that a miss, had something else on, but I hear it went very well. Right, we will make a start. As you probably spotted when you joined, we are recording today's session, so it is all being recorded, and then it will be on the YORhub YouTube later on. So all the sessions we have, so whether it's Tuesdays, whether you've missed Tuesdays or would like to see it again, whether it's today's, all the sessions are going to be on the YORhub YouTube channel. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second part of the YORhub Virtual Conference 2025. My name is Steve Baker. I'm the YORhub Joint Chair of Operations, and I'm also your chair for today. So I've just got a cover some housekeeping points. Even though it's a virtual one, we still have some. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function. Also, preempting the normal question we get from people, we are going to put all the slides on the YORhub website afterwards. So after we finished all these sessions, the slides from all the presentations will be put on the YORhub website, so you'll be able to look at them there. On Tuesday's part one of this year's conference, we had sessions from speakers on the state of the industry, your civil major works too, that we just completed the procurement of. And I know for people attending on Tuesday, at that point, we weren't able to tell you who'd been appointed. Oh, we've got, sorry, I thought someone had a hand up then, but it's disappeared. But the award letters are going out this afternoon for your civil major works too. So sadly, I've been told I can't tell you who they are at this point because they're being issued this afternoon, but they will be on the website shortly. And if anyone is keen to use your civil majors, if you make contact with Mark Ives or one of the colleagues at Sheffield, such as Gary Wright, then they will be able to assist you on that and take you through who the people are who've been appointed there. And then also on Tuesday, we had the implications of the new Procurement Act, which we were trying to aim more at construction professionals and what they need to know as opposed to pure procurement officers who need to know a lot more in depth with the technical details, etc. So we've got another packed program for you this morning. So we've got AI developments in construction that I'll be doing shortly. We then have Stephen Bill, who is the Sheffield City Council insurance manager, who is going to be doing construction insurance and answering questions for people regarding that. And then we're finishing with Chris Bourne and Mike Raven on YORhub myth busting. We have allowed time between sessions to have a screen break and make a drink. So you're probably relieved to hear we're not intending to go from the first session straight to the second session without any break. The intention is that they will finish early. You can then go off and then come back for the next one, which each one starts on the hour to keep it nice and simple, mainly for myself, probably. So without further ado, I think I will now start the first session. I have been having some trouble since I got updates. Let's see if it works. I had a major update early this week on my laptop, so hopefully that works and goes in. There we go. Right. AI developments. And I think when we think about AI, it's one of these areas that does affect all of us. We're all used to AI. I think most of us use it in everyday life, whether it's sort of Alexa, Siri, those sort of chat boxes. ChatGPT seems to be quite popular now. We've got AI in self-driving cars. may not be a good thing. The accident rate when you see them on the news isn't particularly good. We have AI in medical diagnosis systems nowadays, which improves it. And the last few months, really, we're now getting AI in emails and sorting out your emails, telling you what your priority is, or you have the option to opt out of that. AI are using a lot of spam filters, recommendation engines such as Netflix, YouTube, Amazon. They all use AI there in the background on people's preferences, etc. So it's something that I would suspect most of us use every day without even knowing about it. But obviously today we are focusing on AI in construction, and I thought I would start with a few examples. Some of you may have seen this on the news because it broke a number of Guinness records last month. And often when people describe what AI can do, they say it's taking what we can do as humans, doing it more quickly, more efficiently, etc. And then others mention how AI goes a lot further and does what we can't do. And when you're looking at something like this, amazing display, 16,000 drones, all controlled together. There's no ways that as a human we could do that. So that was done via AI. I do hear that if that's something you'd like to see, I am told by colleagues from North Yorkshire Council that they have a similar event, but to a lesser scale, later this month at Scarborough Castle, where you can go and see their drone display as part of the Scarborough Fair. So there are options to see that. Drones in themselves probably are quite old hat nowadays, I would say. The actual use of drones, which are used for surveying, mapping, etc., where they can be equipped with LiDAR, high resolution cameras, so they can do your 2D maps, your 3D models. Those sort of things aren't new. But the actual use of AI to take an awful lot of data that you can have from drones and put that into various models and usages is new, and that is something that we're all gaining from. And certainly you can now actually take drone data and put it into, say, a BIM model. And things like structural inspections, drones have been used for structural inspections, again, for many years. It's not new. They can get up to roofs, etc. They can get other areas that we can't see. They can be used for wind turbines, those sort of areas. But again, the data from that is now so much more detailed because the AI analysis of that data, and even things like safety audits, we use drones for that, and asset management, etc. So there's a lot of uses for drones, all linked to AI. And I thought I'd move to one of my sort of pet subjects, I suppose, being a member of the Association of Project Safety. And when you look at health and safety, sadly, construction does have the highest total number of deaths of any industry in the UK. It is less when you look at the number of employees and number of workers. It is slightly less than agriculture, forestry, and fishing still, but it's still very high, and the accidents are very high. And a lot of the accidents and deaths are still due to force from height, trips, etc., and also being struck by a moving object, being struck by vehicles, etc., collapses on site, those sort of areas. And anything that we can do to reduce those risks and remove those risks is obviously a huge benefit to the industry. And one of the great uses at the moment of AI is monitoring safety. So there's now a number of contractors certainly on the larger jobs, they will have cameras stationed all around the site. They're live cameras, and they do real-time hazard detection. And that is connected to AI, and that will flag up if they see anything that is unsafe. So action can be taken. So we're moving from sort of being reactive, if you like, to proactive. And when I say reactive, I do appreciate we do have health and safety inspectors going to site for our various companies. We have individuals taking responsibility when they're on site looking for things. But generally, we're still reacting to accidents, whereas with these sort of systems, it does allow us to be more proactive. Now, in producing some of these slides, I thought I'd see what Copilot could do, because most of us have Copilot. I don't have the license, I just have the Copilot that is free, which comes with Office 365. And I've also done a couple of comparisons today with ChatGPT, just to see what ChatGPT could do compared to Copilot. Again, I only have the free copy of ChatGPT. In fact, I must admit, I only downloaded it for the purposes of this presentation. And for both of these, I've had no training. So anything that you see produced by these slides, I've not done the training. The council has extensive training on this. And I must admit, I haven't found the time to do that yet. And I have found it very, very easy to use. So the first thing it did was when I mentioned camera detection, it produced a slide. It's not dissimilar. If you look for videos, if you Google for videos on this, it's very similar. There are cameras around the site. They go around and they can do an analysis of various things, including people, including structures, and they can take a view on how safe that is. And also, I had this produced for me by Copilot. So it mentions PPE, and the cameras can look for PPE. Whoops, go back up. So it can look whether people have got hard hats on, goggles if they're needed, depending on the operation, boots, etc. And then it can flag up if there's any issues. It also looks at walkways, scaffolding. It can see if there's unsafe scaffolding, if anyone's in danger of falling, if things can fall. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the biggest risk in health and safety is still falling from heights. So anything that can pick that up in advance of it happening is just marvelous. They can also do the trip hazards, and they also do, they can do daily machinery checks, because obviously machinery should be left in a certain way. They should be locked up in a certain way. So they can actually do checks on those machinery just automatically to see if they are left how they should be, and if there's any issues there. Same information, I asked ChatGPT to produce me a slide. And when I went to ChatGPT, originally it looked really good, because it asked me some great questions. It said, did I want a video of this or an animation of it? And if so, how long? And it gave me different lengths. So I thought, oh, this is looking good for presentation. So I said, I'll go for real-time video. And I put in 30 seconds, and then it asked me questions such as, would I like, what gender did I want to do the presentation? What sort of language did I want to use, etc. So I went through the questions, pressed the button, and it gave me this, which wasn't quite what I expected. Very, very nice slide. And it also came up at that point that actually the version of ChatGPT I had, having asked me all these questions, couldn't actually produce the video. But what it did produce for me was a storyboard of 6 pages, and each of those pages was so many seconds of video, and it told me how I could go search for that using PowerPoint or other sources, make those different parts of the video, so over 6 slides, and then combine them. I must admit, I didn't actually go through and do that, but it's interesting that it gave you that option. But it was just disappointing that the starting point was it was going to produce me a video, and then it ended up giving this very nice slide, not dissimilar to the previous one. We've got the AI powered cameras again, computer vision for real time, the instant alerts to personnel so people can go out and actually deal with them. Part of the work we've been doing, I've been involved in recently, as does my colleague Mike Raven, who chaired on Tuesday, is with the digital construction group that we both sit on, is we've sent out an AI survey. And I know some people attending today have responded to that survey. And we were interested in best practice. And on one of the slides at the end, I have actually got the link to the survey. So if people attending today, if your company's been doing some great AI practice, then please go on that link and give us details of that, because we're going to be making case studies. if you've had issues and it's not worked how you thought it would, and you've wasted time on it, or you're unsure about the results and it's not reliable, then again, please fill in the form for that reason, and it would be great, because what doesn't work can sometimes be important is what does work for us. So this is the one that came from Jackson's and Galliford Try. It was actually submitted by Jackson's. Both Jackson's and Galliford Try are on your frameworks, two good contractors we have. And it sort of fits in quite well with the previous slides, because they're using the AI software to collect and analyze data from CCTV footage. They're looking at people's behaviors, which is always interesting, because with the best build in the world, you can have a construction site, you can put in all your walkways, you can safely secure where people are meant to be going, demarcation all in place, etc. And then in reality, for whatever reason, people just take other routes. So I thought this was quite clever to actually look what people do. So they're going to look at the movements, and that's going to improve how the sites are set up, how they operate, etc. So it's ongoing. We would hope to get a case study for this at a later date. So I put that in, and then I asked Copilot to give me an image, and it gave me this image, which possibly is a construction site, probably not. If it is a construction site, we won't go into the lack of PPE, but it's quite a nice image. AI can also be used for plant maintenance, and there's various firms who are doing this. I've got no relationship from Caterpillar, just that I'm not being paid a fee or anything, but they're one of the ones who now have sensors built into their machinery. So it gathers data, temperature, vibration, and sound. So if it's got anything unusual, then it will flag it up. So it's, in theory, in advance of something breaking down or needing repair, you're giving notice, and you can organize that vehicle to have that repair. And it also takes account of the being AI, being able to learn from itself. It can take account of the site you're on and those conditions, because obviously we've had some hot summer days this year, so things will be a high temperature on those days anyway. So it will take account of that, it'll take account of winter days. These are things out of the normal on that particular site. So if there's a lot of vibration that shouldn't be in that machine, then that will flag up where the issue is. If there's unusual sounds, it will flag up. And so that allows you to take up those maintenance. That reduces, obviously, the downtime of machinery, allows you to get replacement in possibly as well, if you can, depending on the type of plant. And also, as I was reading this, I did wonder, is this something we should have more on the civic estate? I don't know how much we have on sensors and things like swimming pools, etc. It's something that perhaps some more M&E colleagues can comment on later when we come to the Qs and As. But it does strike me, we do have various plant rooms. Some of it has priority equipment in, and seems ideal that we could have things like this if we don't already have it. Something you're using, again, plug it up at the end when we come to the Q&As. That would be great. I have been told I can bring people in at that point, so we'll wait and see, because it'd be really good if people have got advice to share on their experience of AI, then I will try and bring people in. We've not tried that on Tuesday, so we'll it'll be an experiment, I suppose. So moving on, that was the information I had. Copilot then produced me this summary slide. So it does everything on the previous one. It's a nice picture. Didn't take it long to do. Just good for presentations. I also wanted to flag up that LGA, Local Government Association, they have loads of case studies on various areas, and they actually have one on AI. It's AI generically, not AI for construction, but obviously some of that would apply to all of us anyway in our general day job. So the link there, it's on the slides, but you'll find it at Google anyway. So that would take you to the website. And one of the ones that I wanted to flag up, I had two that I was flagging up today from that website, and that was from Barnsley Council. And Barnsley, great being a Yorkshire council as well. Really good to see them there with a case study. I don't know whether we've got anyone from Barnsley here today who might be able to comment later on how well this went. But they were an early adopter of, of Microsoft Copilot. So they actually joined in about 2023, I believe it was, and they bought something like 2,000 licenses to try it out. And they tried it across various areas and they had a great success. And so they were seen as a forerunner really for trying Copilot. To do that, they had a strategic partnership with Microsoft, which they were offering at that time. And they rolled it out. It was a controlled way, and the majority of their staff had access to it. The summary of it, and obviously you can go on the website, you can see the whole case study there, but they reported a lot of time savings in tasks such as meeting transcriptions and minutes. They found it very successful for that. Summarizing documents, admin support. Also interesting that procurement processes benefited from Copilot's ability to answer qualifying questions, which I must admit, as someone who does a bit of procurement, I was intrigued how that was used, and I thought I must catch up with colleagues from Barnsley, because obviously as an authority, we would normally write the questions. I could see this being more useful to consultants, contractors, etc., who are attending today, putting into Copilot, seeing what they have out. And I know some of them are doing that, but I suppose it doesn't do any harm to actually test your question and see what answer you get for that question. Legal services found it very useful as well for leverage of documents, summarizing complex tasks. And of course, that would go the same for any of us. And finance teams actually used it for micro debugging of spreadsheets. So again, a lot of us use spreadsheets, whether it's just Excel or a more complicated one. So it's interesting that Copilot helped them with that. And overall, the usage data showed that 70% of the users did engage with Copilot. And at the end of the trial, many of them wanted to keep the whole license, which was interesting. The second one that I wanted to flag up today was AI in transport. And Lancashire County Council, great that they're another Northern Council, so I'm seeing them as a partner to us. Or they've been leading in a lot of transportation policy for a few years now. They're a recognised leader, and they wanted to do something looking at real-time traffic predictions. And I suppose historically, we've all seen the tubes across the roads when you're counting traffic numbers. And sometimes we've used cameras to do short surveys, etc., in the past and build models from this. But the great thing about AI, it now allows us to take it to another level. So they've used real-time models using historic traffic data to predict future conditions, which we've all been doing. But the difference is they can now integrate that with live data, and they can look at that and they can respond to traffic management issues based on the live data. So the model's set up with your historic data, but then it allows them to actually do something a bit cleverer. So they've got sensors around, they use machine learning to look at vehicles, cyclists, pedestrians, and then that allows them to optimize junctions. Now, that in itself, as I say, isn't new, but it's the analysis you can get from the live data and what's happening and how you can respond to that is a little different. And the bottleneck in the last part of the slide, you'll see bottleneck not spelled correctly. I decided to leave that in because this is a slide produced by Copilot. So Copilot asked it to produce me a slide based on some information. It produced the slide with a spelling error in, which I thought was, interesting. Shouldn't really do it, but there we go. So these insights help engineers plan more efficient bus routes, reduce delays, obviously double R then reduce, etc. So not totally reliable in this instance in doing the spell check, although I didn't ask it to do a spell check, but it did produce the slide. And so you've got AI there, as it says, we've got smarter data-driven decisions in transport planning. Again, full details are on the RDA website. So at this point, I thought I would move from sort of thinking about examples to a little bit about AI, and there's various models around there, and it is meant to be simulating the human intelligence and machines. but it does take it to a whole different level than we can do ourselves. So it does its tasks like learning, it does reasoning, it does decision making for us, but for a lot more complex problems. And so you take machine learning, where it learns from data. Colleagues here today who use Autodesk, BIM, etc., that is built into a lot of those models. Deep learning, it does advanced pattern recognition for deep learning. So it learns itself. We can also obviously use AI ourselves to learn. And then you've got generative AI, which I mentioned earlier, things like Copilot, ChatGPT, and chat boxes, again, ChatGPT, Alexa, as I said, Siri, Copilot, probably, I must admit, I've only typed things in, but you can talk to it. So yeah, Copilot would be a chat box as well. So AI, as it says at the bottom, branch of computer science based on creating machines or software that can perform the tasks that normally require human intelligence, but it can go far beyond that. I will flag up one issue though with AI, and I'm calling it AI sameness, because one of the disadvantages of AI, especially if you're using sort of the same, say, Copilot all the time, you will find things are very similar. When it's the way it produces slides, when it's the way it gives you text for answers, it's all very similar. And that is your AI sameness. And it can be very generic. As we're also aware, it can pick up errors. There's been loads of that published on the news, etc., on social media, where AI will go out there, different devices, and it will look for information. And if there's a lot of false information for whatever reason that's being published on social media, it doesn't always understand that that is actually fake. And it will sometimes provide you information that isn't true. So whenever you download, whether it's ChatGPT or which I did the other day, it comes with a load of health warnings about it could be inaccurate, not to believe it, etc., etc., because they know those sort of issues. So just a few AI easy wins. Meeting minutes, as I mentioned, Barnsley have already used that and they found it quite successful. I've heard different reports, I must admit, of minutes. I had a colleague at Leeds who was chairing a large meeting in West Yorkshire. His normal minute taker wasn't available, so he recorded the minutes on Teams, used Copilot to write the minutes, and it worked very successfully. It summarized it, pretty much all the action points were correct, and he found it, he was just totally impressed and said it's something we should all be looking at. Other people have had less success, but obviously Barnsley found it very useful. I know some people use it just to summarize the meeting. So they will do the minutes themselves and then actually use the, say, ChatGPT or Copilot or one of the other ones to actually do more of a summary and action points. But it does generally have a good success rate. I'll also flag up on this slide, there are some, this has been produced for me by Copilot. I gave it some information, it produced a slide again. Some of the links here may not be true. I'm not recommending them. They're just summaries. So estimating, when you're looking at estimating and tender review, this is more for when you've got a large tender documentation, you want to review those documents, and you can do that with any of the standard AI packages. So you could use ChatGPT. These are sort of large language models, I suppose, as they call them, that can use these. One of the other ones that I've seen mentioned is Claude, that's quite good for doing this. And it can summarize the tender documents. It can prepare budget estimates, etc. It can do you work breakdowns. It can do your task lists from those documents. It can give you items, etc. So it's very useful if you've got a lot of documents to give you a very good summary of what's in there. So on this occasion, I'm not saying writing the documents. This is about reviewing them and perhaps putting out estimates for you based on it. It could actually produce you a bill of quantities, etc. The next stage, sort of linking to that, is Gantt charts for programming. So again, it can take the information from the documents. You can actually produce a Gantt chart, and that Gantt chart can go straight into MS Project. So there are a number of packages out there that will actually produce you a very good Gantt chart, programming chart. It will have things like the critical path on, it will link the activities, I'm not saying it's NEC compliant, but from the point of view, if you want to do some checks on your documents, etc., very useful. You can put it into various formats, and it gives you a good example of what's included in the document, how long the project would take, etc., all automatically. And then you can also say, put it in MS Project, that's what you use, other packages, and then you could improve it. But it actually does you a really good first draft that you would need to check. So that takes us on to document preparation and review. It can prepare documents for you. So you can use AI to prepare all your project documentation at the start of the project. You can do your tender document. You've got standard tender documents, etc. It can do a fair bit of that for you. As we mentioned, it can do your programming. It can look at risks. So risks is something it can look at all the information in the documents. It can look at data that it's got historically from projects that you may have fed in on where there's been risk, and it can actually produce you a really good risk register. Learning upskilling, that is something I think we're probably all familiar with the learning we have to do. AI can actually give you a lot of good training tailored to construction roles. That is a whole presentation or series of presentations in itself. And the last one, which I suspect most of us have been doing, is the devil's advocate, where you stress test your assumptions. And it's can be quite a fun thing to do as well. So whether that's perhaps some claim you're putting in, some valuation, anything you want to test, you can actually look at that. You can present it with your position and ask it to give you the argument against it and break it down of anything you do. So it's quite useful for acting as the devil's advocate, if you like. Robotics, brilliant subject. We've probably all seen the amazing pictures of robots on construction sites, climbing up buildings, having access to places that we wouldn't have access to ourselves, etc. And so they have a whole load of uses, and it does depend on the equipment that you have on your robot, obviously. So they can monitor progress on site. Drones can also do some of this and are possibly a bit cheaper, but these alternatives. They can carry out laser scanning to show construction progress. That laser scanning can actually be then fed into digital twins. It can be fed into BIM systems. So you can actually use a robot to go around the site, do laser scanning that takes the data of structures, etc., of layout, of as-built, and puts that into a model. It can also scan for heat spots on plant. So going back to maintenance issues of plant, you can actually use that to look for problems potentially. The getting access is quite good. I mentioned drones earlier, but you can also use robots to have access to where we can't reach, but also where it's not safe for us to reach. Again, with my health and safety hat on, when you're looking at health and safety, the first thing you need to do, if you can, is to remove the hazard, as we all know. If you can't remove the hazard, the second step is you remove contacts of human with the hazard. So anything you can do with a robot in an environment that is unsafe for humans, now that could be due to it being hot or other reasons. It could just be certain things like that a robot can do. It could be what you're handling. It could just be the risk. Anything like that you could use a robot for. So they can capture data, including images and videos. Great for quality control inspections. Again, they can take a massive data very, very quickly. And also you can use them for site security, which people also use drones for as well. They can have drones going over, checking for site security regularly, and you can use robots for that. So this is what the photograph shows the standard type of robot you may see on a construction site that are available today, that are operating, that you can actually buy and use on your jobs. The other thing that you will see a lot of are the humanoid type robots. And it's always interesting. I think normally when I see them on the news, they're running the half marathon in about 3 hours and the last to finish. They're going around a very simple obstacle course and struggling to do it. So they're still a way off, I think, in practice. But that shows a very simple task that the robot is doing there. So probably more one for the future. They are AI robots out there now. They are under development, not quite there yet as far as I'm aware. But again, if people are using them, if you know ones that are being successful, humanoid form, please flag it up at the end when we get to a discussion, or even fill in a case study on it. So back to the survey we did, BAM submitted one that they're doing. So they've got a project at the moment using something called BuildDots. Hopefully that's how you pronounce it. And they're piloting it on 3 projects. And if you want to know more about BuildDots, if you go builddots.com, it actually takes you to their website. So there's a load of information on there. So they're going to do some case studies at the end of the pilots, which really intrigued to see the results of that. And it improves transparent progress tracking. So they're looking at package productivity, reducing risk, those sort of areas. So it's an additional resource to capture data and manage dashboards. So it is something that people are using at the moment. It is out there, and they are piloting it. BAM, another YORhub contractor. So that's something that's available. So I decided, although I had looked at the website for BuildDots, I decided to ask Copilot to tell me about it. So I just put in what is BuildDots, and Copilot produced me this slide, which is great, and looks to be right. Let me know if anyone knows it's not right. So they mentioned using AI 360-degree cameras that it captures and analyzes site data. So again, it's about the real-time insights and what it can do with quantities of data. So it looks at performance measurement. It can delay reductions, which is great, because obviously a big cost on construction sites is delays. Delays take longer. Sites are there for longer. On cost of those sites being longer. You know, if you add a few months, add a week, it can be huge cost. So anything that reduces delays, reduces costs, especially if something's on a critical path. It gives you transparency, and it does help with the planning. So one for another time, I think, when BAM have finished their case study, hopefully we might have a webinar on that at a future date. Another one from Mason Clark, and I quite like this one, mainly because it's a while ago, but I used to do a lot of modelling in land drainage. When I say a while ago, we're talking the 1980s here. I'm showing my age. And we were doing, the consultant I was working for at that time in Liverpool, we were doing a lot of leading stuff. So we were looking around for sort of latest research, latest serious standards as they were, and we would find the best formulas. I was writing computer programs. If only I could still do that today, I'll tell you, that would be good. But at that time, fairly good at programming. I was writing my own programs, etc. And we were doing some big projects nationally, various places on land drainage studies and hydraulic modelling. So the research and the time to do that, or anything along those lines, can be quite extensive. And have you found the latest stuff? What else is out there? So I did quite like this one that came from Mason Clark, where they've used AI to look at the complex research papers, extract the key information, and then taking embedded AI that's in Excel to generate those formulas, etc., and do those calculations. AI is everywhere, as I mentioned earlier. It is in Excel. So yeah, it's great to see someone using that. And what they found was that gave them a 6% reduction in research time. So reduction in research, reduction in cost. So you're saving cost, but when you've got good staff as well, and the last thing you want them doing is wasting time on research. If it can be done quicker, that's much better for whether it's a council, whether it's a consultant contractor. Obviously, far better to be reducing any wastage in time. And it also gave them innovative design approaches. So definitely a win-win. Looking forward possibly to having a case study on this later on. So that was another good example that came from the surveys we're doing at the moment. They are ongoing. There is no end date to them. So earlier I mentioned risk assessments. A lot of our colleagues here from construction design teams, they do use Autodesk. I imagine some of them are using Autodesk Construction IQ. It is available. It is. I don't know whether, must admit, I don't know whether it's an add-on that's paid for, but it is part of Autodesk. And so you can actually use that to produce your risk assessments. And so you can do detailed risk assessments from that taken from your job. So it's proactive risk management. It frees up staff. Obviously, you do need to check these things. Construction staff are very, very good at risk assessments. They're very good at risk workshops. They do all sorts of red, amber, green, do the pots, you put away money for your risk, you look at probability, etc. So they're very experienced at checking it, but and developing these sort of registers. But anything that can do it quicker and save you time, even though you then will have to check it properly afterwards, is obviously a great thing for us. It gives you an enhanced collaboration. You can share the dashboards across the teams. A lot of our teams now, certainly on the larger jobs, you've got the client working closely, you've got councils working very closely with the consultant, with the contractor, everything's shared on one platform. So it's good that that's part of this arrangement, and it does give you smart decisions. So another great example there from one of our YORhub consultants. Sorry, that was the previous one, but I'm sure there's people, I'd like this to be one that our consultants are using. Please flag up if you're aware of it and that you're using it and how successful it is. So unlike our AI, the great thing about AI is the amount of data it can analyze, which is far greater than we can do. And although you come with these errors, it is more accurate than human errors generally. So it looks at the checklist, it looks at observations, it can do daily risk assessments for you. So if you've got things being developed, if your model, for example, is being developed, other information from the site on progress is there, it can actually update that risk assessment automatically for you on a daily basis. The risk factors will change on a daily basis, so it can also flag up how that's changed. If you haven't been doing your safety inspections, that can be in there, or other inspections, quality inspections. So it can do recommendations on that, on hazards. So it's just a great system to have. And again, project controls for people managing things, it actually allows you to track the schedule and cost risks. So again, you can get up to date as a manager of a project or involved in the management, you can actually get updates daily on where that project is if you want, and if the information is updated. So it's risk management, improved decision making, it's automated, which is great, and it's an intelligent assistant. And just moving on, automation of plant. I think this has been around for a number of years, and when I've been to sort of various construction conferences and that, they always like showing them at quarries, because you'll have these, they're like a quarry, especially an American one or Australian one, because you've got these massive machines, you've got huge excavators, huge vehicles taking the dirt away, massive pickup trucks, etc. And it's all automated. And the same with large excavations. If you're doing a large excavation, perhaps a big flood defense scheme or something else, you can have it all programmed in where you're actually doing the excavation. It might have different angles, etc., on the sides, and the machine can go in and so much more accurate than a driver doing it. So it can go in, it can excavate it, you have the graders there, etc., or using AI, it can be taken away. It's LiDAR and GPS integrated. So there's some brilliant systems out there. Again, it'd be good to know if any of our contractors or consultants have been working with these on their jobs and could give us some case study on that we can share with people going forward. So this one here is China, and as we know, China likes doing things bigger than most of us. And so they built 158 kilometers of road using AI robots and 5G with no human labor whatsoever. Yes, I know that's the American spelling of labor, but it's a photograph and that was produced on the web. And just brilliant to see something of that scale being done with AI. And just going back, again with my health and safety hat on, anything that removes human contact in dangerous situations, such as and excavating, digging, large plant is dangerous. If you can remove humans from that position, in that situation, that will reduce fatalities, that will reduce accidents. It has to be a good thing. And if you're purely a bean counter, and hopefully none of us are here today, more bothered about saving money than looking after lives, reducing accidents and the harm and the trauma that that causes. But every accident has a huge cost to it. And I haven't got the figures with me today. It's not a health and safety presentation, but it can delay a job. That in itself can have big costs, but accidents themselves and resolving them do have a cost. So it would save you costs, but that, for me, that isn't the main reason we're reducing accidents, but there is a cost saving there. But I'll say that shouldn't be the driver for it. So automation of plant, big benefits. You can get bigger productivity. Partly depending on the site, noise, restrictions, etc., can be involved, but you can work 24/7, depending on its location. You can certainly work longer than one shift that we would have for humans. You do get reduced labour costs involved in that, and you do get safety added in. So it is certainly the future up to a point. We'll have to wait and see, and it is happening now on jobs. Great to know if it's happening in Yorkshire and Humber though. So if people could let us know, that would be appreciated. So I'm now going to come to your AI health warnings. We'll see this because whenever you download, whether it's on your phone, your iPad, your computer, whatever. Zoom is not responding. Right. I just got a message, Zoom is not responding. So I'm just wondering, can people still see me?
Yeah, we can still see your slides, Steve.
Oh, that's good, because I've got a message saying that you can't, and I've got to close the program and restart. So thank you for that. I will carry on. Appreciate that. So you've got the accuracy and bias on it, that it does depend on the data that goes in. It also depends on interpretation of what you've asked to do with that data. I mean, they mention if it's incomplete, it can lead to incorrect or unfair decisions, but I think it's also the nature of what you ask an AI device to do. You have to be quite careful there. It is a tool, and we do need to use human judgment on that. And it's probably not an AI example, but I remember a good few years ago now, there was a bridge built in Australia using CAD as it was, so sort of pre the current packages, and it was built upside down. And no one realized, because it was a very complex bridge, and they just assumed it was true and that it was right. And they didn't realize they built it upside down. And unfortunately, it collapsed during construction. And sadly, a number of people lost their lives during that. And it was only when they looked at it, they found out they'd actually built it upside down, which sounds, you sort of think, how can that happen? But it's not always that obvious. And this is the problem with any tool. You do need to have good checks in place to make sure you understand what it's producing and it is correct. I'll give you a more light-hearted one. Again, a few years ago, there is a multi-story car park that was built in Birmingham upside down, and they didn't realise, the reinforced concrete one, didn't realise at the time until it started cracking not long after it was finished. Got some good structural engineers in, and they actually said, well, actually, it's still structurally safe for quite a few years. We'll need to check it, but it is still safe. It will just have cracking. So again, these sort of things happen pre-AI when you're relying on computers, can happen now we're relying on AI. There are some sort of checks needed. Then there's the security risks. Obviously, models can be exploited. You could have, so you do need to be careful of those risks and have adequate risks embedded in your systems and use your trusted platforms, etc. Cybersecurity is an ongoing problem for us all, with hackers after information wanting to hold us and ransom for that information. That doesn't just apply to AI, but AI models does give an awful lot of data that a lot of organizations who are up to no good would love to have and use against us. So data privacy, Again, you have to be careful about sensitive information. We're all aware in local government, the GDPR or consultants and contractors partners. Again, GDPR applies to them. So you do need to be careful when you're using AI, where you've got that sort of information as part of the system, that the data privacy is maintained. Intellectual property can be interesting as well, depending where it's getting the content from. So you do need to be quite careful what it is using when it's pulling things off the web. We mentioned research papers earlier, etc. There's a possibility some of that could be copyrighted. So all that is checked, and I know Mason Clark do those checks before if anyone's getting concerned. And again, ethical use as well. You've got to be careful about the ethical use of it. And as I flagged up earlier, A1 sameness is something that you can see a lot of. And we had it recently on one of our procurements where some of the submissions had used AI, and you read it and it seemed quite generic. And it wasn't as detailed as we normally have. So it didn't score highly as other people. And when we ran it through an AI machine, we got the same answer, and they were so similar. So you do have to be aware of AI sameness just generally. You can end up having very similar products and outputs when you use AI if you're not careful. And just moving on to the last slide, one of my favorite ones, OpenAI and other AI devices, they have written in them that they can't be used for captures, which is obviously something I think most of us hate. It's the sign to distinguish humans from bots. Except most of us struggle to get them right first time, most of us humans. But bots, as I say, a lot of bots aren't allowed to do it. And what someone has done is they actually persuaded ChatGPT that they were looking at fraudulent sites. So they weren't proper captures, they were actually fraudulent sites. And by doing that, they got ChatGPT on real sites, doing real captures, and unlike humans, did it first time all the time. So you now have a situation where you can use AI that's meant to distinguish humans from bots, being able to do something that we struggle to do. I just thought that was a great example. So, and the last slide, I mentioned that we've done the survey a number of times. We are interested in AI best practice. Any guidance notes you have, any other information, pros and cons. So if people have got something out there they want to share with us that we can make into a case study, possibly future webinars, then the link's there when these slides are published, and you'll be able to provide your information. And thank you to Mason Clark's, BAM, Jackson's and Galliford Try for already doing this for us. And with that, I will go to any questions. So I'll see what we've got in the question and answers. So I'll just have to open that up. I don't think we've actually got any questions. Unless for some reason I can't see them. Mike, any questions you can see?
No, there's I don't think any have come through. There was one that I was keen to ask you, Steve, which I think you're potentially uniquely placed with your procurement expertise, because we're starting to see tenders using AI to strengthen quality submissions, and I wondered how you foresee AI affecting procurement. Are we going to, for example, are there steps that we'll need to take to prevent the tender with the best AI winning procurements? Do you think we'll have to move away from the traditional written answer process within tenders?
Yeah, it's a good question, not least because I think the first thing that would strike most people is, well, let's have the detail, ask them for the detail showing that they've done it. But procurement doesn't work like that. You have the pre-qualification stage, if you like, is what we call it traditionally, which is the backwards looking one. And when you get to the quality questions, they're forward looking, so people aren't disadvantaged, so bidders aren't disadvantaged. So actually being a forward looking question is hopefully you've done it, but it does allow people to say how they're going to do something, especially if it's specific for a certain job. So in doing that, it gets an interesting area. Now, saying that, we have had some AI submissions in, and I don't know whether I was cut off at that point, Mike, when I mentioned that or not.
If you wouldn't mind maybe just recapping what you were covering, that'd be good.
Recently, we've had some AI submissions in, and they looked to be AI. We have a tick box that says, have you used AI? And when we looked at the contractors who put it in, they had ticked those boxes, and they were generic. They weren't detailed enough. And I think generally it comes back to my comment before on AI sameness. We could tell they didn't look like they were written by humans, and they didn't score as well because they weren't specific enough on what we were asking. And I think at the moment, that's the danger of AI. So currently, you can tell, and contractors, consultants are probably at a disadvantage if they're relying too much on AI. Also, it should be based, the AI should be based on what your company can do. So it does have to be based on real data, and we can question that as people who procure things. We can question the nature of your answer. And in some ways, some people have always got an expert in to help them with doing their questions, especially smaller companies. Large companies have the big bidding teams who specialize on answering questions. Smaller ones, for something that's important, will bring an expert in. And so personally, I don't see AI being very different at the moment to that you are saying your information and you're using the AI to help you. But you're right, Mike, going forward, it could be more interesting, and it might be for certain types of work we would want to revert more back to relying on interviews and make that part of the process, so we can actually see the people and they have to go through their answer so we can see that they've got the understanding and the knowledge. So not at the moment, it's not causing us a problem. Could change in the future. So excellent question. Thank you for that. Right. Welcome back, everyone. I think we got Stephen. Are you online? Right. So we now have our construction insurance session. It's something that we've had a lot of clients asking for us for a while now, to have a better understanding of insurance. We put it in obviously our contract documents, the specific requirements, and most of us don't really have a good understanding of what insurance is, what's required, just generally. So we've really honoured, I think, today to have an insurance manager here. So Stephen Ball from Sheffield City, he's their insurance manager, and we've got Phil, who is hosting this session for us. So with that, I will hand over to Phil and to Stephen for the next session on construction insurance.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone. As Steve said, this session focuses on construction insurances. So as many of you know, insurances can be a contentious issue when tendering construction projects. And it's crucial that we strike a balance that ensures adequate cover to protect clients from the inherent risks associated with construction, but we don't want to overburden contractors and consultants with excessive requirements that ultimately just end up to increased overheads through higher insurance premiums. So this session aims to clarify the available insurances and their coverage, helping us to determine appropriate requirements for our contracts. And YORhub is delighted to welcome Stephen Ball, who is the Strategic Insurance Manager for Sheffield City Council, who are one of the lead authorities working on the YORhub frameworks. And today, Stephen will share his extensive experience and knowledge of the insurance industry, focusing on practical considerations for construction contracts. With over 10 years' experience at Sheffield City Council and additional private sector experience, Stephen is well equipped to lead the session and explain to us about construction insurance. I'll now hand over to Stephen to run through the session.
Hello, everybody. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Right. Yes, as Phil says, I've worked at Sheffield for 15 years and in public sector insurance for over 20 with a private sector background. So today we're just going to try to run through, if we can, and demystify some of the insurance types that you're going to see when it comes to construction. So we'll look at the greater spotted insurances. Some of the lesser spotted insurances. We'll look at indemnity limits because that's a common question about getting those right, setting those at the right level. As I run through, I'll pick up some insurance market challenges, so concerns that the insurance market tends to have when it comes to various types of insurance and mainly on the material damage side of things. We'll then look at something that's a bit more controversial that comes up quite often, which is capping liability, and look at how that interfaces or should interface with the insurance programme. And then we'll look at a brief look at JCT and NEC insurance conditions and some of the additional things that are differences between them and some things we need to just look out for in various types of contracts when we're dealing with various types of clients. So we're going to start off reasonably gently with the contract works insurance, which covers the material damage for the works themselves. It's on an all risks of physical loss and damage basis. Cover will include permanent works, temporary works, and free issue materials, so things provided by the client or the customer. When you're checking documents kind of that come in to prove that a contractor's got these kinds of things, you're looking at two real options, which is project specific. So that's just one policy that covers the duration and the value of the project that we're dealing with. Or it might be on a contractor's annual insurance program. If it's on the annual insurance program, the thing you need to just check is that the maximum contract value on that annual program is sufficient to meet the value of your contract. Your project specific should have the same or similar contract sum. There are some territorial limits in there that might affect us dependent on where we're working, and there's also some defects liability cover, which usually is for 12 months but can be extended to 24 months when you're insuring a building. So this is new builds, extensions, renovations, and alterations to buildings. So that's one of the common ones. The issues that insurers have been facing when it comes to kind of material damage, there are some new ones that have kind of cropped up in the last few years. One of them is damage from water losses. So you'll all be cognizant of the fact that fire has always been a big issue for insurers, because you'll all have seen hot works conditions on policies and requirements to measure fire risk. But there've been some significant water damage losses in the last 5 years or so, which has meant there's been a bigger focus on making sure risk management around water is appropriate for the site. I suppose just using common sense, by the time you're piping your water up, your project's probably a long way on, and there's a much higher value at risk than there would be earlier in a project. Sustainability issues have been a bit of an issue, and these are kind of partly because they've driven some losses and partly because they're relatively new to insurers. What we tend to see is quite a bit of timber cladding, blue and green roofs, and then solar panels becoming a bit of an issue. Blue roofs, you might see restrictions on kind of water damage and losses. Both green roofs and solar panels tend to be connected to the maintenance regimes for them actually after construction, because green roofs can often end up being brown roofs, and solar panels can kind of get dirty and malfunction, and that's not always considered at the outset of the project. Some modern methods of construction have been a bit of an issue with prefab stuff, pre-constructed stuff, lightweight construction. Fire safety issues are a little bit of an issue, and I'll kind of move on to these as to where there are strict restrictions when it comes to professional indemnity insurance, so insurers not being able to recover. Lithium batteries is fairly new, and this is about issues of storage of lithium batteries on site and also charging on site during the course of the works. So insurers might commonly want to know how that risk is being managed. And then the other thing that's happening more and more, and certainly here at Sheffield, where we've had a number of larger scale projects recently, is considering the insuring of the building on completion of the works, either the renovation or the new build. So insurers are kind of keen to know what materials are being used, especially when it comes to insulation materials, and also PV panels is something that they want to have a bit of a greater say in kind of the design of the building, or to understand what the fire risk is. generally, when it comes to the most common thing with insulation has been where we are using flammable insulation. One thing perhaps just to note, which is the thing that I come across most often, is that everybody kind of quotes, well, it's within the fire regs, and the fire regs are brilliant, but they tend to deal with fire safety only. So they're tending to deal with what you're notifying that fire for occupants of the building, means of escape, getting everybody out quickly enough. What it doesn't necessarily mean is you don't necessarily, you're still going to get a fire loss for the building, which still could be substantial. So with kind of PIR, when we've got flammable material, because we may have a genuine reason to do that for weight on the roof or other matters, they tend to need to know that is it going to be encapsulated between two non-combustible layers, and they'll want to know the layout of the rest of the roof of the building so they can get to a proper fire load. So we get more questions from insurers about new construction projects, and sometimes questions from contractors who are just wanting to check that what they're using is going to be acceptable to insurers in the future. So it's useful to kind of bear that in mind rather than get to a position that you're really struggling to insure a building after completion, or you've got prohibitive terms. So the next one, and the least controversial probably of all the insurances, is employer's liability. So this is picking up liability for death or bodily injury to the employees in the course of their employment. It's a statutory requirement, so you have to have it to operate legally in the UK. There's a minimum legal requirement, which is £5 million. I've just noted that was introduced as a legal minimum in 1998, so we're more than 25 years away from when that was introduced, and obviously £5 million doesn't get you far these days as it would have done in 1998. Probably some good reasons why it's not being increased, to be fair, because I suppose if you run a business, a shop, or you've got a small office with people in it and you're just doing sedentary work, then £5 million is probably fine. But certainly if you've got loads of people on a construction site, then it's unlikely to be enough for the risks that kind of work can pose. Most insurers automatically issue policies at 10 million anyway, and they have done for a good number of years. It shouldn't really be controversial, and £10 million is going to be an indemnity limit on most contracts. I'll have a look at where we might think about having a higher indemnity limit in the future. Risk to the client from claims landing with the client from employers being injured on site is very low. Probably the other thing just to say, if you're checking contracts or documents when they come in as a contract manager, if somebody sends you a certificate of insurance for employer's liability, it will always say £5 million. It'll always say a minimum of £5 million, because that's the statutory document that proves that you've got the required insurance cover to operate legally. But the schedule will probably be at 10 or higher. So kind of don't worry if you've got the certificate and you think they haven't got sufficient insurance to meet what your contract terms are. You just need to ask another question and get the actual document that you were looking for, because it'll probably be okay. So as I say, it'll nearly always be £10 million on most of the contracts that we deal with. You might consider suggesting a higher limit of £25 million if the work is inherently dangerous. There's loads of work at the height, and where the risk of catastrophic injury is likely to more than one employee in one incident. It's difficult for the insurer to escape liability, and death and personal injury are an uncapped liability. You can't legally cap your liability for death and personal injury, which effectively means that it's always in a business's interest to make sure that they've got the right employer's liability cover. And it's not particularly expensive to go up from 10 million to 25 million pounds. And like I'll mention on public liability, you're probably going to be buying that in extra layers, so you're not going to have all of the cover with one insurer. So third-party public liability, another one that's in all contracts that we'll be dealing with and is a requirement. So this is covering the contractor's legal liability in negligence. And this is obviously not for employees, it's for all other human beings that aren't employees, so death or personal injury that may occur to them. And also for third-party property damage. So that's one of the things we kind of need to focus on when we're looking at the kind of client risks from the value of the existing building, but also other property in the vicinity. Some of the other weird and wonderful things we kind of can come across where that kind of link in with public liabilities, where we've got rail exposures, so BAPA agreements, where we're dealing with construction near or on or over the railway, with agreements with Network Rail. Generally, again, third-party liability insurance isn't expensive. There are ways to buy it in excess layers that make it relatively cheap in the great scheme of things. As I say, when you get higher limits, so over £5 million, you might see 2 or 3 or 4 insurers even with limits of liability. So effectively, if you've got 5 over 5, you've got 10. It's generally cheaper for the second 5 because the second insurer is not involved unless there's a major loss, and most losses are smaller losses. So it's the attritional stuff up to £5 million where the majority of the risk and the majority of the claims come from. The other thing is it can be extended to include non-negligence liability, which is a standard clause in the JCT contracts, and it's 6.51, but it could be added to an NEC contract if the risks of the work determine that we actually need to think about that from a client point of view. And I'll just go on to explain what that is and why it might be important from the client's perspective and how we kind of go about it. So the most common thing we probably get is what should the right indemnity limit be for the public liability on a project. It's important if you're asking somebody kind of like me to give you some kind of comment and help with that you understand kind of what the project is. So I've gone through things where, say, I've got a project, it's called Bob, what should the liability be? But we need to know more about what the project's doing and where it's being done. So the key things to look at are really, the place, the vicinity of where the work's going to be taking place, what and who is going to be nearby to those works during the construction or the alterations. Is there any interface with a public highway? Because you'll come across highway requirements for higher levels of public liability if you've got something that's close to or interfering with the highway. And is there restricted site access? So you might have somewhere where there's very narrow spaces to get things in and out of the property when it comes to materials, and that might be craning things. We've certainly had things where we've had to, we're working on a school and it's in a housing estate and it's tight, and we've had to crane things over buildings, which is obviously an additional risk. Then think about people. So we're looking at how many members of the public could be at risk from injury at the location from the types of works, and might that be children, and that might be access or unauthorised access to the site. So children might be schools, it might be work in a park, places where children are going to be around. And then the property itself, the value of the property that's being worked upon, because that's kind of the client's risk. So we've got an existing building that's worth £5 million, then there's a potential for a £5 million loss there. And what other property could be damaged that's in or around the area? Are there other tenants in the building, or is there high value property that's nearby to the property that borders it? So just as a rule of thumb guide, you never need to go below £5 million, because £5 million is affordable, and every contractor would expect to have at least £5 million. Where you're looking to probably look at the triggers for increasing that is when you've got kind of higher risk type activity. So you've got some hot works, or as we mentioned earlier, some water works, water risks in the site, or we've got work in a high occupancy building where you might have other tenants as well, and then the interface with the public highway. And then you might be looking in the 25 million to 50 million pound region when you're looking at a kind of city centre location, loads of other high value property in the area, lots of footfall, and where you might be craning materials in, or there might be difficulty in getting access to the site. That's a challenge with the contractor and needs to be managed. So I did mention one of the issues perhaps to look out for from the client side is when there's a risk of non-negligent damage. So this is damage to a third-party property in the vicinity of the works that isn't caused by the contractor's negligence. So the contractor's done everything reasonably foreseeable to protect property, but there's still been damage to a neighbouring property. The claims are then made in nuisance rather in negligence, and they have to be made against the developer because, as we've just said, the contractor's not legally liable because they've done everything that they can reasonably have done to prevent damage to neighbouring property. So we're thinking really about what other property could be damaged in and around the area of the works. Are there other tenants in the building? And is there high value in neighbouring property that might actually be connected to the one we're working on, or have a party wall, or have a very small space between one building and another? And the scope of the works we're looking at is there going to be any piling? Is there any demolition? Do we know there's going to be some removal of support, or is there a risk that by doing what we do, we might be inadvertently removing support from another adjoining building? Excuse me. Sorry, Matt. So just thinking about where this actually comes from when it comes to non-negligent damage, it's a historical case from 1958, where the legal principle was set that effectively an innocent third-party property owner in the vicinity of a site shouldn't be disadvantaged by works that a developer or a client has undertaken in the vicinity of that property. So what it established is that even if there is no negligence, in nuisance, not in negligence, the developer, i.e. the client or the customer, can be sued for damage to that third-party property. So the scope of cover of this extension picks up collapse of the building, subsidence, so we might be, if we're piling, or we know there's going to be vibration, heave, the weakening or removal of support to another building, or the lowering of groundwater. And it's bought as a request as an additional insurance cover. It's in the joint names of the employer and the contractor, similar to some of the other insurances. The kind of oddity about this is it doesn't actually protect the contractor because the contractor doesn't need protecting from claims that aren't in negligence. The employer needs protecting from claims that are in nuisance, but that's the way it's bought. I did mention some of the things that we might need to look out that can affect the public liability issue that we have when it comes to limits of liability, and some of these agreements are the most common ones. Probably are the Network Rail agreements, so the basic asset protection agreement and the asset protection agreement, because they're going to influence what the value of the contractor's public liability is going to need to be. There are also some things for the client to think about that are contained in that agreement that won't be ordinarily covered by the client's existing public liability insurance. So the BAPA agreement requires 25 million and the APA agreement requires 155 million pounds. So that's only going to be achievable with buying excess layers to cover that additional limit, because generally a contractor's not going to have anywhere near that on their normal programme. The issue with the agreement, though, is it requires the developer or the client to compensate Network Rail for things that aren't necessarily due to negligence. So if there's interference with the rail network, so effectively they stop running trains for a period of time, the client is responsible for the losses that Network Rail incurs because of that suspension of rail activity. And the reason that a PL claim won't cover that is it can be in situations where there's no damage and there's no negligence involved, and it's effectively a pure financial loss. So we're not saying we've damaged the railway, and we're not saying there's any negligence involved. So a couple of examples could be you know, we've got cranes on site, and they're working exactly as they should, but there's extreme weather conditions that mean that the crane starts rocking, and for safety reasons they have to close that particular stretch of line for a period of time. You could even have a fire that's an arson at a site where you've got smoke billowing across the railway for, you know, half a day, and that could end up in significant losses from the value of shutting down the railway. There are policies available that the client would have to buy, which are basically contractual liability policies that can cover this risk. One of the insurers that has a product is QBE, but if you came across that, it's something to consider and speak to with your insurance advisors or your insurance brokers. The COBOD agreement is not too dissimilar in so much as it also includes losses that so it's any kind of loss, you know, irrespective of negligence. Sometimes these can feel a bit harsh, but if you think about it, it's a little bit like the neighbouring property owner. There's nothing in it from them from the works happening, so why should the person who's allowing you to do the works, or in the neighbouring property owner's situation, hasn't had any saying whether you do the works, be inconvenienced or have a loss by that happening, or Network Rail or the coal board allowing work to happen. So a little bit more complicated and controversial now can be professional indemnity insurance. So this is liability for professional services, including design, advice, and specification. It's slightly different to the employer's liability and public liability policies, where they're on a claims occurring basis. So effectively, if I'm covered today and an accident happens today, but the claim isn't made for another 2 years, the policy I had today will cover that. So that happens on public liability and employer's liability. Professional indemnity insurance is you have to have a policy in place at the time the claim is made, irrespective of when the error may have happened. There are some market challenges here. Costs are more volatile with professional indemnity than they tend to be with employer's liability and public liability. And the other thing from the contractor's point of view is they have to maintain that cover because of the claims made basis of cover for 6 or 12 years post completion, dependent on the contract liability that there is. That tends to not affect cost, because if you've got a business that's still running 6 and 12 years later, they'll still be buying professional indemnity insurance as sure as eggs is eggs. But it does mean that the exposure to that insurance type lasts longer than it does on some of the other insurance types. And then there are some restrictions that can apply in the PI context. A couple have been around. The asbestos restriction has been around since God was a lad. Pollution's been around for a long time, so it's where you may get a lower limit of indemnity for losses arising from those two events. Fire safety concerns and restrictions came along, unsurprisingly, post Grenfell, and the newest one we see now is obviously damp and mould. So that's kind of linked to housing conditions and the problems there are with housing stock, and some pretty high value cases that have had a lot of media attention recently. So effectively what we're saying here is that we do expect that sometimes or often a consultant or a contractor is going to have some restrictions that might mean that they can't meet the full limit of what we're required for all of the other professional indemnity risks. So the cover for professional indemnity is we need to focus on financial loss primarily and damage to property, not on injury. So we're not saying the indemnity levels to pick up injury, because the vast majority of that risk is going to fall on employer's liability and public liability. So we need to think about the impact of the client of the services or advice being defective in some way. That's wasted costs, increase to the project value caused by delay or additional works. Obviously, it's often more expensive to put something right when it's gone wrong than do it right in the first place. And the other things we have to consider with professional indemnity is that these are defensive policies, so you don't have automatic access to the policy. You're effectively going to sue somebody, which means that there will be legal costs and experts' costs involved in dealing with that claim before you even get to a settlement value. You might also have loss of funding or revenue or anticipated savings from a project that might need to be picked up by that, especially if you've got grant funding and you've got clawback. Some of the complexities with this is that while the other insurances are generally on an each and every claim made basis, so effectively your PL's £10 million, you can have £10 million claims in 1 year or £20 million claims in 1 year. Not all professional indemnity policies are written on that basis, so some of them are in the aggregate, so that's the maximum value of claims that the policy will pick up in that one policy period. The aggregate risk creates a bit of uncertainty, because if actually we want to be protected by a £2 million, we think £2 million is enough to meet all of our losses, and we've got a £2 million aggregate loss. At the point that the client makes their claim, they don't know what's left in that pot, because they don't know whether other claims have come against the contractor's insurance in the same period, and will start to erode that value of the pot. So as I mentioned, inner limits on these types of things, including kind of cladding. So sometimes if it's not fire safety as a generic feature, it might be in regard to cladding. So where we know there are markets restrictions here, I think it's reasonable to be able to cap your liability when it comes to what a contractor is able to provide. So I'll give you a slide to show you how that might, manifest and consider. So really, these are things about looking at, if a contractor's telling you, I've got 5 million PI, but I've only got 2 million for this, are they telling the truth, or is it a ruse? Are they faithful, or are they a traitor? What we're trying to say is, yes, these are market conditions. It's not possible for them to get over that issue. And whenever we're talking about capping liability, we're always trying to think about each party, the client and contractor or consultant, protecting their bottom line. And their bottom line, from my point of view, is the uninsured losses. So your bottom line shouldn't be affected by your insured losses, because that's why you've insured them. So you've transferred that financial risk as part of your insurance program. But if you can't do that, then that's obviously an issue, and we need to be able to consider that and deal with it. So this is one of the examples kind of that we've used at Sheffield when it comes to restricting liability. So this is kind of the left-hand side being the event, describing what a professional indemnity policy covers. The cover sections saying what the requirement is for that insurance. So if you say £5 million and just leave it at £5 million, but there's some fire safety work or pollution, or they could be within a framework for you, and the contractor is worried about evidence in that because they can't say they've got 5 million for all of the types of work, then you can kind of say the cover that we require is, and what those limits may be. And then kind of on the right hand side, if we're going to cap the contractors or consultants liability to the levels of their insurance cover to protect their bottom line, but still give us protection from the insurance at the limits that we said we required, that we're comfortable with, then kind of that's the way you would do it. You would strip out on the right hand side different caps for the different types of work types and losses that can arise. We'll do a little bit more on caps and liability in a minute or two. Each and every can be a little bit more complicated, as I say, because when you're kind of going out, you don't know necessarily what the respondents to a tender are going to have in terms of their insurance arrangements. Certainly about 10 years ago, all PI was on an each and every basis. You didn't really get anything that was on all PI was on an aggregate basis. Each and every was less common. It's become more common, certainly in the last 10 years or so. But one of the ways that you can choose to deal with that is you could have an each and every requirement, and if your each and every requirement is £2 million, you might also accept an in the aggregate requirement, but in that case you'd want to increase your limit to give you a better chance of there being money left for your claim should you need to make one. And generally, as a rule of thumb, you double that. So you might have a a 2 million requirement for each and every, and a 4 million requirement if it's in the aggregate, or a 5 and a 10 if your starting point is 5 for professional indemnity. And then this is just really another example, I think, from a similar thing where we're capping the liability, but this is one that we kind of use for the coal assets. So possibly peculiar to Sheffield because of the number of pits in the vicinity over the years. But again, it's an acknowledgement that actually we might need a higher level of liability where it's a coal asset, but difficult to deal with in a framework where you could have work that is or isn't part of that, doesn't come across that need to sign an agreement with the coal board and get their permission to work. So this is a way of just saying what we want is £2 million, but if it's coal work, we'll be wanting you to have 5 to try and make your framework be able to flex a little bit more to different types of work. So this is probably the most common thing I come across, and maybe the most misunderstood thing when it comes to capping liability. So what I'm going to show you really is things that we've considered and used in Sheffield that have worked for us, and the considerations that we've gone through to make those decisions, and try to get, as Phil said in the intro, a proper balance of risks between the client and the contractor. So the easy bit with capping liability is there's some things you can't cap legally, so they're out of the equation straight away. So you can't cap your liability for death or personal injury, and you can't cap your liability for fraud. The harder bit is there'll also be some other things generally in a contract which the client is not going to include in the cap, and they tend to be commercial confidentiality, data protection risks, IP risks, and payments. So they're often excluded matters. They're unlikely to change, but we need to kind of factor those in when we're setting the caps, in so much as if we are setting a cap, we don't have to worry about adding a value in for these things into the cap because they're not in the cap in the first place. So the risk, you can think, oh, I need 2 million for data protection and I need $1 million for IP, and well, you kind of don't in your cap because the cap will stand up separate to all of these things. And the important thing really is how it interfaces with the insurance programme, so that you're not kind of cutting your knees off from the required insurances by capping below those levels. So this is kind of the easy bit as a rule of thumb, is that there's generally no need to cap your insurance limits below what your expected insurances are, or that the requested insurances are. So when it's PI for skill and care, never below the professional indemnity limit, or potentially sometimes multiple thereof if you've got a longer project or a higher risk project. So you could have multiple claims. Even if you've got a 2 million limit, you might have multiple claims, though it is unlikely. And for property damage, the public liability limit, because that covers on an each and every basis in any event. So it does leave a lot that can still be capped. But the focus from the insurance point of view, to making sure we're not cutting across what the insurances are covering that we've requested, is we're looking at financial loss and damage as things that we don't want to cap, so that the effect of the insurance is negated by a lower cap than the insurance levels. And again, just consider matters that shouldn't be in the cap, so that we're not kind of adding those back in and worrying about setting the cap much higher than it needs to be, because they're already excluded matters. So a little bit of a word of caution when it comes to liability caps, and I tend to say this, and this is not just in a construction sense, it's the same when we deal with anything that we buy or services that we commission, is that we commonly get a position, or there was commonly a position, where client wants everything uncapped, contractor or service provider wants everything capped at the fee. Both of those things, in my view, are equally as ridiculous as one another. The fee level is way too low. The unlimited liability it doesn't exist in reality, because nobody's got unlimited resources. So when your insurance money runs out, it's the assets and the cash in the bank for that particular business. So it won't be unlimited. So it's kind of a bit of a comfort blanket. And it needs a bit more thinking about than that. So there is a piece of case law, which is Ample Abbey against Trust against Turner and Townsend, that looked at this particular issue of capping liability. So in this particular scenario, the liability clause in the contract was that Turner and Townsend had inserted a clause that said that their liability would in no event exceed either value of the works or £1 million, whichever is the less of those. But also in the contract, they'd agreed that they would take out professional indemnity insurance with a limit of indemnity of at least £10 million for any one occurrence or series of occurrences. So, and each and every £10 million professional indemnity policy. So they've got £10 million of cover, but they're actually trying to cap the liability at 1 million or less than that if the value of the claim is less than £1 million. So kind of the outcome of that judgment, or effectively what happened is a claim is made by Amplethorpe Abbey Trust. Value of the claim is eventually within these proceedings agreed at £226,000. But the wording, because it capped at the fee level or £1 million, and the fee level was £111,000, they were trying to disapply the 226 and apply the 111. But what the judgment actually said, but that the cap was unreasonable because the client had asked for £10 million. Contractor had said they provide £10 million, but actually by then having a cap that is below that, it means that that requirement is illusory, it's pointless. If a cap is allowed to exist, you just cut the knees off the £10 million, which the client has actually wanted you to price for, and it's part of effectively, in my view, the specification of the works that we need include the required insurances to carry out those works, and the protection that they have afford to us and to the two parties and others. And the big risk with that is that actually the net effect of having a clause that doesn't stand legal scrutiny is effectively there is no cap. So what we're going to look is that in cases where we want to cap the liability, if we do it at a reasonable level, there at least will be a cap rather than the cap disappearing and it being unlimited. In this case, an unlimited cap didn't matter because the claim's worth £226,000, but if it had been worth £22 million, then having a 10 million cap to cap at the professional indemnity level would have been useful for the contractor, but suddenly could disappear. Should just say, obviously, this is a piece of case law. Case law all turns on its facts, and this case had particular facts, but I think it's a good benchmark case. A little bit like I said about a client maybe thinking that unlimited liability, is a silver bullet for everything, then a really low cap, and I'm saying it isn't really, then a cap that's too low for a contractor probably isn't the silver bullet that you perhaps think it might be. So let's have a look at JCT and NEC standards when it comes to the insurance clauses. So JCT obviously long established. It's the contract I've probably worked with most of my career when it comes to insurance matters. NEC is relatively new to me, and JCT is pretty prescriptive. So your general rules of thumb and how things are worded in the contract is that where it's a new build, it's a policy in the joint names of the contractor and the employer for the new build until practical completion when it hands over. For an existing building where it's a refurb or an extension, it's for the employer to provide in joint names of the contractor and the employer. What we need to look out for is instances where it needs to be redrafted when the employer under the JCT contract isn't insuring the building. And I'll pick some examples of kind of what they are up as we run through. NEC is a lot kind of looser, but both of them are capable of being amended if necessary. So generally, irrespective of whether it's a new build or it's an extension or refurb, it's the contractor who provides the cover for the material damage to the works. Some insured on that's from the contract data. So linked to the contract value. Usually the client insurances are none, although the client will still need their own public liability to cover their risks that are in the contract. But from a local authority point of view, they will have that automatically. It's just not named in the contract as a required insurance. So I mentioned JCT one, we have to be a little bit careful about what the standard clauses are. So the common things, and we've seen a few of these certainly in Sheffield, is where the tenant is the employer under the contract. So they're actually employing the contractor to do the works in a building that is insured by the landlord. So because the definition is the employer will provide the existing building's insurance. If the employer isn't the insurer of the existing building because the landlord is, then the employer can't comply with that condition. Second thing we've seen a few times in Sheffield and is still ongoing is where the local authority is the employer, but it's work being carried out at an academy school. And that's because local authorities don't insure academy schools. They're insured separately by the Academy Trust who make their own insurance arrangements. So in that situation, and we've had it's been commonly where we've been doing works for special educational needs provision, where because of the geographics of the city, we've needed to provide provision in schools that aren't local authority mainstay schools anymore. They are academy schools. So we've actually been paying for the works and are the employer under the JCT policy contract, but we're not the insurer of the building. So a draft needs for that. And the other thing you could come across is actually if you were doing a piece of work for an academy school, if that academy school is insured by the Department for Education's risk protection arrangement, which a lot of academy schools will be, because it's the biggest insurer of academy schools in the country by far, the DFE's policy specifically excludes joint names cover for a contractor on the existing buildings, so you would need to redraft in that situation. There is a kind of common drafting user replacement schedule. The things you need to be clear on is that the existing buildings are not insured by the employer and there's no waiver of subrogation against the contractor. And effectively all that means is that the contractor has to carry the risk of negligent damage to the building on their public liability policy. So if there's some hot works and it's not managed properly or and there's a fire at the building, then the insurer for the building pays the claim, but they've still got the right of recovery against the contractor. So again, it's then making sure that your public liability limit is the right value. So you've got a value to cover the damage to the existing building and the cost of it. And really we ought to also in that situation make sure we're disclosing that existing building work and the scopes of work to the insurer so that they know what's kind of happening. It does then help if you've got a drafting that says they'll be able to recover from the contractor rather than where it's a joint names policy and they can't recover from a contractor because they're effectively insured and have got the right to indemnity under the policy. So contractor liabilities, damage to property owned and occupied by the client and providing the works. Contractor carries that a risk on the public liability insurance for that. Indemnity limit needs to reflect the value of the building being worked on. There are compromises for limiting liability, and I think it's commonly X18 that we use. So what you may consider is actually it's appropriate if you've asked for £10 million and you've got a £5 million building to cap client losses for property at £10 million because the building's only worth 5 million, your works might be worth 2 million, you might have got the cost of the fact it's going to be more to put that right in the future and the cost of inflation, because by the time you do the works, if it's an incident happens towards the end, you know, the price of fish obviously goes up and that's an issue for us. The other thing that we've perhaps started to do when we've done that is actually tends to be nothing in contract data about the actual reinstatement value on a property. So I've found us in situations where we're kind of arguing about something that's not really material because the contractor's worried about having a cap of £10 million, even though their insurance is £10 million, because they don't know whether it can go above that. But actually we know the building we're working on is only worth £5 million. that's the insured reinstatement value. So sometimes just to put the risk into context, so it's easy to understand and is acceptable for both parties, that might be something you want to consider. There are a few common requests we get within, I mentioned that there's the client insurance as a norm. There are ways that client risks can be dealt with. So the common ones that we can see if they're not already included is they want client risks. The contractor wants client risks to be sonic boom, war and radiation. That's absolutely fine because they're excluded from all insurance policies anyway. So it'll be the client's risk after the building's completed in any event, and there won't be any insurance for it. So they're all right to take out. The other one is terrorism. Terrorism is a little bit more complicated in terms of thinking about whether that's appropriate. It is an insurable risk, but it does need a pragmatic approach. And I'll give you an example. So we do insure terrorism at Sheffield, though a lot of local authorities don't insure their buildings for terrorism. So if you're having an existing building worked on, if you didn't have terrorism cover on before the work started, and then you want terrorism cover for the 6 months the works is happening, and when it hands back to you, you won't have terrorism cover again. It seems a bit of an illogical thing to require and go to the expense of having terrorism cover in the intervening period. So in those circumstances, I would accept terrorism as a risk. We do sometimes in Sheffield anyway, because even though I say we insure terrorism, we've got £1 million excess. So again, if we're working on a £1 million building, it's the issue is moot. So quite happy to take that out. So the other limitation of liability things, we tend to really see the requests for liability to be at the fee for the works, or a percentage of the fee for the works, might be 120, 125, but it shouldn't be really used to cut across the insurance covers. So for property damage and for financial loss, if we're hitting our limits at the PI limit and the public liability limit, that should be sufficient. The fee isn't necessarily indicative of what the risk is as far as the works are concerned. So the common one we've come across is it's only a £100,000 piece of work, but it's some hot works on a school roof. Well, £100,000 isn't a lot of money, but the school building's worth 20 million quid. So that kind of doesn't. You can understand the contractor's issue is they want to protect the bottom line, because you don't want to do £100,000 worth of work and bankrupt your business, quite obviously. But what we're trying to say is you won't bankrupt your business, because the limits we've set are linked to the insurances, so they're not uninsured losses. They're going to come from the required insurances that we've asked for. To cap or remove consequential an indirect loss is often a common request, and it's often one that can be accepted. There are projects where it might not be appropriate to do that. So you might have something where you are anticipating savings, so you want those to be included in losses that the client can recover. Though there is an argument that those are direct losses, and I kind of give you an example of that. So if you were having a project where you were having new energy efficient boilers fitted to a building, and something goes wrong in that, then there is an expectation just in the scope of the works that the contractor knows that that's why you're having the works done. And there is some case law about what's an indirect loss and what's a direct loss, dependent on its proximity to the reason for the works. So they tend to be the common things that we see there. So just kind of a bit of a recap and some takeaways, hopefully from today. So your indemnity limits, they do need to be realistic. As Phil said, there's no point asking for 50 million when you don't need 50 million, because it's only going to be costed into the contract, and actually it's a waste on both sides of the fence. Insurers do okay, we don't need to give them more money than they've already got. And it needs to take into account the nature and the location of the project, to just have a think about what you're doing where and what's going to be involved in delivering that project safely, and who and what can be affected by it. They can be adapted to having a limits linked to the availability of insurance for certain activities. So you might have a variable indemnity limit, as we mentioned, or a professional indemnity thing where you've got 5 million for some things, but other things, other types of work are capped at a lower level to match the contractor's insurance. Public liability is relatively cheap. Professional indemnity is more expensive and volatile, and tends to be where there needs to be some negotiation, and there are genuine reasons for that, for limitations in the market, and also because the contractor carries that risk for longer, that claims can still come forward and they'll need to be insured at the time they come forward. And you need to cross-reference against any requests to cap liability, you know, because those two things do interface, the cap on liability and the required insurances, so they shouldn't really be cutting across each other. And then the caps on liability are a commercial reality, so there is a good argument that if we balance the risks, then we make best value out of the project that we've got, and each party is protected to the right level. But they're not a substitute for insurance, and they shouldn't be interfering with the indemnity limits. And then finally, really on both sides of the equation, kind of don't push your luck. So a client can't have unlimited liability and everything. It is an illusion. It's not unlimited. It might give you the biggest amount of headroom, but it's not a silver bullet. And the contractor can't just give the fees back on everything, because that's potentially an illusion when you look at the kind of caseload. And it's also generally not necessary if you've got the right insurance in place at the right indemnity level. And I think that's all, folks.
That's
Unless we
brilliant.
have got any questions, in which I'm happy to try to answer.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your insights, Stephen. We've just had a couple of questions come in. The first one, I believe it relates to actually this sort of now transfer in terms of plant on site, moving away from sort of diesel to EVs for plant, and the need to put EV charging facilities in during construction. And the question relates to issues around where the chargers are within 10 meters of a building. They're currently looking at compiling a policy on this, but their insurance company is being extremely vocal on the risks around this. Is this something that you've come across at Sheffield?
I haven't, from the terms of where we're putting them in on a construction site. We certainly have when it comes to insurers being interested on, because we've got EV chargers on some of our locations, you know, our transport hubs, etc. And they do want to understand what the kind of risk management that's in place for that. When it comes to distance away from the building, generally, yeah, anything that's combustible, you know, even if it's if we're putting it, you know, a shed or a playhouse next to a school or building, they want things to be 10 meters away. It really is about making your case about how you're going to manage that risk. You know, the number of vehicles, how closely together they will be. Will they be left charging overnight? Is there somebody? Do you know all of those things that might mitigate those risks? And actually, sometimes when it comes to how close to a building it is, there can be a difference between where it is in connection with what's on that kind of wall and combustible material on that wall. So certainly with kind of schools and stuff, we'll see sometimes where physically we can't put something 10 meters away, that there are ways to mitigate the risk, and it may be 6 meters away, but they'll want to know, are there any windows, are there any eaves that overhang it? Do you know what I mean? Things that can affect the fire spread. And then other things like, where's the location, and is it close to a fire station, and is it, how would you identify that there's a fire so you can get somebody out to deal with it as quickly as possible? It's really about kind of presenting the risk as you see it, and then kind of working with risk management and what your insurers want.
Yeah, and I suppose that comes back to one of your early points, isn't it? That the insurance companies are wanting to get more involved in those design decisions early on in the project, because that's how you can actually have the most influence on those sort of issues in terms of actually mitigating and putting in place appropriate strategies to try and reduce the chance of, if something was to happen, let's say an EV vehicle catching fire whilst on charge, that fire doesn't spread in impact or damage the wider infrastructure or building. So no, that's really useful, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience as well, and I'm lucky I've got a really good surveyor who's really knowledgeable but pragmatic, is they like being asked. They don't like being told what you've already done and not have a say in it. And actually, if you can give them a say, you know, and then work with them to do that. And it's a little bit like we've just talked about with uncapped liability, and I'll give you your money back. They'll start off wanting everything and the earth, but generally you'll get them to a position. You'll generally move them from that position and get them to a better position. And some of the things don't cost a lot of money. They're just maybe about thinking about your planning and how you do it. And obviously your bigger risk is you do it and you tell them afterwards, and then they say they're not going to provide the cover, or you want you to shift something, and it, you know, becomes more expensive to unpick something that you've already done.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And one final question, and it comes back to sort of the I suppose how contentious the cap on liability can be. But in your experience, do you see many claims that actually sort of hit the top end of the insurance policy, or even sort of take a contractor or consultant to the cap on liability, or instances where or those instances where you actually need to rely on the full sort of full level of insurances to cover that financial loss?
And the answer to that is no, because generally, we haven't seen many major losses, and the losses that we've seen would link to would always be recoverable against what the cap is and the insurance limit is. Part of the solution to that is to make sure you've got the right limit if you're going to cap at your insurance limits. But what I would say is, whilst we haven't seen that happen, if you capped at the fee, you definitely would. Because you're going to end up with something where you get a loss towards the end of a project, and you're going to make a claim, and you're going to get eroded by illegal fees, and you're going to get time eroded while you're dealing with that claim, and you're going to get inflation, you know. And so if you capped at the fee, you know, just getting your money back is definitely going to have a much bigger potential where you're going to get a loss that outstrips that.
Yeah, that's it. And like you say, that just comes back to, I suppose, if you set the levels at an appropriate level, you shouldn't be hitting the cap. You should have some wiggle room left there as a client. Not saying that you would have 10, 20 million pounds left, but you should have some wiggle room left just in case, because you never know what could happen, even up to the point of handover. But I would just like to thank you again, Stephen, for your session, for your time today, all of your insights. I've certainly found it incredibly useful and informative to improve my knowledge of insurances. I'm just going to hand back to Steve now, who's going to MC us to the next session.
Bill, thank you.
Right, hello everyone, and thank you, Stephen, for that wonderful session and your insights and your experience. That was great to have that, and for you to share that with us. Much appreciated. And we will now move on to the YORhub myth busting session, which is a double act between Chris Bourne, who's a YORhub board member from North Yorkshire Council, and Mike Raven, the YORhub Performance and Improvement Manager. And so they're going to deal with the certain myths that we've been told about this year. And so over to the I was going to give you a nickname, but I'll stay away from that. That could come back and haunt me. Over to you both. Bye.
Slightly relieved, but yeah. Anyway, hi everyone. Let me just get my slides up. So
I'm wondering what he had in mind now.
I know, and it's like, well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, if people aren't aware, Steve's retiring tomorrow, so if this is if you want to say something, this is the time to do it.
He would have got away with it, wouldn't he?
He would, yeah, absolutely. So, congratulations to everyone who's managed to make it all the way through and stay on who is still here for our session. Do appreciate that we're hitting 12 o'clock, so there may well be people getting sandwiches out of the bags and eating through this one. Just to kind of, I did get asked questions yesterday about what myths are we going to be busting. Now, unfortunately, they are procurement related. We're not planning to tackle the Loch Ness monster or anything like that landing on the moon. But as Steve says, so there's myself and Chris taking you through this session. Just to kind of briefly give a list of kind of the topics that we're going to be covering. So there's quite a few different areas that we're going to be talking about, and really it's hopefully talking about how you can get the most out of the frameworks. Just to kind of explain also why we put on this session. So YORhub's been running certainly since the late 2000s. So we were set up in response to government at the time saying that there should be a regional construction procurement hub in each part of the country as an area of expertise. For those procurers on the call, you'll be aware how rare and valued we are. There's not thousands of construction procurement professionals sat around looking for work. So we were one of the hubs set up. Now, we undertook an exercise at the start of the year with a number of our users and suppliers to see what works well when it comes to YORhub, what could be improved, because we recognise that the procurement landscape has changed since those early days when YORhub was set up. That's been really useful, and we've got a whole series of actions that we've been putting into place to address some of that feedback. We also kind of became aware of some comments of things that there's some misconceptions about the frameworks, some limitations that may that we wanted to kind of run through just to kind of make people aware of the flexibility within the frameworks, the options, that kind of thing. So we just want to kind of canter through these. There may be some of the items that we run through people may have specific questions on. By all means, put questions in the chat. There may well be ones that we need to pick up separately if you've got specific projects that you want to go through in a little bit more detail. Myself and the framework management teams are always available to talk to clients and potential clients about specific jobs and how to make the framework work as well as it can for yourself. So don't be afraid to reach out to us. So I think the first one then is over to yourself, Chris.
Yeah, I've got the first one. We thought we'd start with a biggie. So we're going to tackle the subject of direct award. Direct award has been probably one of the biggest areas of client feedback that YORhub has had. We all know that clients have their favorite contractors, their favorite suppliers, and the huge challenge that those clients have is, how can I legally and compliantly get into a contract with my preferred supplier? It's always been a contentious area, but fortunately there has been a lot of clarification around this in the new procurement regulations. What we have done at YORhub is listen to that, and all of our new frameworks that we are currently procuring and the ones in the future, they are all now going to incorporate the option for clients to make a direct award. We're also retaining the other routes, so we're not cutting anything out. This is just something new that we're going to add into the frameworks moving forward. What we've also done is undertake a review and look to add into all our existing frameworks the options for client to do a direct award. As I say, it doesn't replace anything that we've got already. So that's a really good new thing that's going to come into all of the frameworks and all of the existing frameworks. So if we move on to what those procurement options are on the next slide, we've got several routes that we include in the YORhub frameworks. In respect of direct award, we've now got 3 routes. So the first route is rotation. That effectively works very much on what we call a cab rank basis, where a client can come to us and they can ask who is currently top of the rotation list, and we will allow them to enter into a direct discussion with that supplier to make a direct award to them. Within the YORconsult framework, we have what's known as a fee-initiated call-off, where the framework can demonstrate the consultants that would be providing the best value fee and allow clients to enter into a direct contract with those consultants. And what we now have is the addition of the new client selected direct award option as well. We appreciate that they're not suitable for all clients, and of course then mini competition does remain within the frameworks as an option, and we can do mini competition using several routes. So we have single stage routes as well as 2-stage routes, and all of those can be done on price only, quality only, or the most popular, which is usually price and quality in a combination. We can also do that with the NEC or the JCT forms. And if you are proposing to use NEC, I'm hopeful most people will be aware of this, but we do provide a full suite of templates and training and support so that you can carry out your procurement using best practice. I just want to now focus in a little on the client selected direct award process. So we'll do a bit more of an explanation on this. And the first way that we would address this is ask the customer and the client to fill in a short form. And we're offering 2 ways really of going through the direct award process. It's where the first one is where there's substantial similarities to a previous project in which the framework supplier was involved, or the second one is where the framework supplier has already performed works or services that the client requires. So what we're able to do is focus in and give you a bit more of information around this. And on the first one, so this is where the proposed call-off has substantial similarities to a previous project. This could be various things, and we're keeping it, I'm going to say, a little bit loose here. Really, what we want to do is we want to give clients the basis of doing a direct award where you are able to, in accordance with your own procurement rules. So really, this is about the client building up the justification that the direct award can be made in accordance with your own constitution and procurement rules. What we're doing is we're giving you some examples of where you can achieve this. So in this first example, you wish to buy additional or partly replace existing services. So this could be that where you've got a contractor that has already performed a contract for you that's similar. It also works as well for phased works as well. So if you are able to justify that in accordance with your constitution or your procurement rules, that you can make a direct award and there is good rationale and substantial benefit for you as a local authority, then you can use this direct award process now through YORhub. The wording that we're using is to justify this is very, very similar to the wording in the regulations. What you've also got is the option to use this in phased working. So if you've got a project that's going to be delivered in phases and you've gone through a procurement process, that could have already been a direct award or it could have been a mini competition, then you can use this to award second or later phases of a project as well, where there would be a significant disadvantage in you for moving contractors. For example, you might be able to achieve savings in prelims, CDM implications from 2 contracts working on site. So this is giving clients a new option to direct award and make the justification for that. The second option is in relation to where you've already worked with a supplier, and this is what I've referred to as already in the phasing. So if you've got a contractor who's done a feasibility study for you, has maybe done some early contractor engagement, this again is a process where you can continue that direct award and continue to work with that contractor through our framework. And it's just a matter of making the justification on the appropriate forms. If you've got contractors that you've been working with repeatedly over years on a series of contracts, again, it's quite easy to form these justifications and justify the award selection now that is an option within the frameworks. So that's all on the direct award process. Mike is going to take you through the social value and question side of it.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Chris. And yeah, I mean, that second item, I mean, I've seen it on multiple schemes where, for example, you might bring a consultant in, or you've done an exercise to get a consultant to do your feasibility study or an outline design on the project, and then you want to understandably take that work through with the same team to later stages if they're performing, and it allows you to give that reasonable justification as to why you want to do a direct award. So moving on to quality questions. I do apologise as an aside for the slides are quite wordy. I have made them; they are wordy. I apologise, but I felt it was useful to have the detail in these because you may well want to refer back to them after, you know, as Steve mentioned earlier, the slides will be shared after the event and the recordings will be on the YouTube channel. So we had quite a few questions about quality questions. These are, you know, these covered things like, why am I having to use 5 quality questions for a 50 grand toilet refurb? The social value defaults don't align with our authority. The questions don't ask what we want to ask. And it's important to kind of, we'll go through a little bit of detail, but it's important to kind of highlight as a starter that the templates that we provide, that, you know, they're written to be framework compliant, they're written to be compliant with legislation and the typical sort of requirements that the public sector needs to comply with when it comes to procurement. That they're not the only answer, if that makes sense. And, you know, we make these templates available. Some authorities always use our templates. Some authorities don't like using our templates because they've got their own in-house templates which are really developed. That's totally fine. You can use your own templates. We can provide you with information to amend your templates to make them framework compliant. So there's those kind of options. But just to kind of go through a little bit of an example, and I'm using YORbuild 3 Medium Works for this example, but all the frameworks run along the same principles. So I'm not going to read this out word for word. You'll be delighted to know. But this is the quality template for the section for the quality questions. Now, I just really want to kind of make the point that this is the standard wording. If I then go on to the next slide, these are the bits that shouldn't be changed. So it's the titles of the questions, and your question should add up to 100%. That's pretty much it. If you want, you know, you don't have to ask all the questions. You should, if you're doing a quality exercise, probably recommend that you ask at least 2. What the weightings are lined up for asking at least 2, but you would generally want to do that. I would also draw the attention that whilst we've left whilst the headline question titles are the same, there's a lot of flexibility within these. So when you think about outline method statement, for some people that is how focus on how they're going to deliver the work. It could be how are they going to liaise with neighbours, how are they going to prevent disruption to the town. So there's all those kind of flexibilities and opportunities that you can choose, and I would recommend that you, when you're looking to develop your own tender, I would imagine that in most cases you will have some project specific detail that you want to get. And just to give an example of how this is done, and then I'll jump back and I'll talk about social value. But just to give an example of how I've done this on a scheme. So this is a affordable housing scheme that I was involved with the procurement with, and all the areas in yellow, those are things that, and I won't go through line by line or word for word, but just to kind of make the point, these are sort of alterations that I can make, all the project managers using YORhub can make, or QSs, depending on who's developing your tender documentation. So whilst the YORhub documentation is intended to be fully compliant, hit all the standard requirements, it's a safe pair of hands. If you need to tweak it for your specific scheme, which, as I say, I did here, that's absolutely not a problem. If you've got questions about how to do that, again, that's where myself and the firm management teams are available to happily talk through with you that element. Before I move on, I will just also focus a little bit more on the social value section. So this is the kind of towards the bottom of this template, the questions E and F. So it's important to recognize that whilst the social value that we've put in there, we've written it and designed it in such a way to align with things like construction playbook, which talks about output-based social value. So it's talking about specifics of numbers of apprentices, numbers of people back into work, that sort of thing. We do fully recognise that there are authorities with different standard requirements. You might have, you might be looking for a social value cash equivalent, a pounds, a figure in pounds of social value. Absolutely fine for you to take out this section in its entirety and put in your authority standard requirements. And we do put in our notes that if you use an alternative method like that, our standard scoring probably won't work for you. So we would encourage you to replace that with, or at least for the social value section, with your standard scoring. If you've got something that's tried and tested and you're used to and is rigorous and everything. So we did get feedback about we can't make the social value 10%, we can't make it 20%, we can't remove it. Yes, you can do any of that stuff. Again, feel free to talk to me or talk to the framework managers if you'd like a bit more detail as to how to do that on your particular job. Very happy to do that. I've also seen, if we take the example of employment and skills, which we would typically put in there as a scored element, I have also seen it where it's been taken out of the quality entirely and it's just been put in the scope. So there isn't we're not going to score you on your method statement, but you have to achieve these, no question, no opportunity to amend them. So again, you can think about those opportunities. So if you have look, we have to achieve X of social value, and there's no argument or there's no sort of a way to amend that, you could just put it in the scope. So just kind of there are those kind of options in mind. And again, we're here to talk through those options with you. The next one that I'll just pick up before handing back to Chris is we did get we've had a lot of feedback about lack of returns when it comes to expressions of interest, lack of tender returns. And this does, for those who were on day one of the conference, this was picked up quite a bit in terms of the reality, unfortunately for us as public sector procurers, is it's a heated construction market out there. Tenders do in many cases, they have the ability to pick and choose which tenders to go for. We do see, certainly not going to name anyone, but we do see examples where expression of interests come in at very short notice, sometimes with very limited detail. Housing on site of X of 4 units, and there's no detail as to what the site's like, what the types of housing are. And you'll appreciate that when it comes to one of our suppliers who maybe has a choice between 2 expressions of interest, and one's got lots and lots of detail and is really well laid out, and one is a few lines, they're naturally going to look at the first one as a more preferable expression of interest. We do ask our suppliers to reserve capacity within themselves for YORhub, and we do work with them to try and make sure that happens. But there is an element of trying to make sure that your tenders are as attractive as possible. We do also see a tender stage, which, I've seen a number of schemes, for example, where a scheme's been fully designed separately, but then the contracting authority decides to put it out as a single stage design and build to purely put the risk with the contractor, and that's quite a lot of risk for a contractor to take on in a single stage exercise. So it is about thinking about what can you do to make your opportunities as attractive as possible. We will obviously do our jobs of holding our suppliers to account and making sure that they are responding to tenders where the tenders are good quality and they've got that detail in. But it is difficult when we've, in some cases where tenders haven't always gone out as well detailed as they could have been. We do have on the YORhub website guidance on what a good tender looks like. So I would certainly recommend anyone who's thinking of or who compiles tender packages to go to have a look through that. And again, it feels like I'm throwing everything at our clients, and that's absolutely not the case. We fully recognise that clients are increasingly under pressure, time constraints, difficulty to pull together tender packages. All I would say though is I have seen schemes where we've been told this must absolutely go out next month or next week, no matter what. It goes out, maybe doesn't get the tender responses that the client desires, and then the client decides, well, we'll spend 3 months reworking our tender package and then reissue it. And you do feel like there would overall have been some efficiency in doing that work up front and then sending it out. But again, if anyone wants to talk about any of this stuff in more detail, that's what we're here for. So I believe, Chris, is this yours?
Yeah, I'm on the housing lot. So
cheers, mate.
Following on from what Mike's just said about the lack of tender returns, the housing lots really are an area that we've been having some difficulty with. We've been getting lots of feedback around this, that it's that clients having difficulty getting sufficient numbers of successful tenderers. So this is what Mike just said above about, providing good advance notice, preparing a good tender, providing the best information we can is all applicable, but we know we need to do a bit more here as well, and we are. So I think we know that how with the government policies around housing, that this is going to be a growth area in the future. I don't think any of us as local authority clients can get away from that. This is something that we are going to have to tackle, and we absolutely want to make sure that YORhub is providing solutions that clients can use. So we're engaging with contractors now, the existing contractors on the housing lots, to find out why they are refusing to tender and getting to the bottom of what the issues are. And of course, encouraging them to make tender returns when they're invited to. What we're also going to do, and we've been discussing this at the board level where I'm based, is that we're looking at procuring new frameworks potentially next year to specifically address housing in 2026. Now, when we do that, what we're going to do, of course, is engage with the market and make sure that when we set up a framework, it's suitable for our clients, it's giving our clients what we need, but also engage with the contractor side as well, and find out what are the barriers that the contractors are facing in not giving tender returns when they're already on housing lots. There's little point in setting up another framework that the contractors don't bid for. So we want to engage with the housing suppliers, we want to engage with the housing clients, and hopefully whatever we come up with next year will address this issue. But we're aware that housing is an issue, and we are proactively trying to get the contractors to do a bit more to make sure that we're getting the tender returns.
Thanks, Chris.
So maintenance, Mike?
Yeah, and again, this was questions and comments that we had was, you know, it's a shame we can't put maintenance through YORhub and use, or can we put maintenance through YORhub, or can we do some kind of term service contract? And the long and the short of it is yes, and in many cases, people are using term service contracts to give a long-term solution with a bit of flexibility to users. Again, we're very happy to talk through how to do this for users who have not procured a term service contract before. You know, I've talked with some and they've gone, this sounds great, but I'm not quite sure how it works. What does it hold us to? You know, how can I use it to get the most out of it? So just kind of make the point, yes, we do them for all kinds of services and works, maintenance, etc. So do reach out to us if that's something that might be of interest.
Okay, resources. Some of the feedback that we've got is that we're not quick enough to respond to queries when customers need support. So again, that's something that we've listened to. It's something that we're working on. I think what we do want to highlight is that this is a really specialist area. Often we want to make sure that when we are responding to your queries, that we're giving you the right information, that we're not leading you down the wrong path or misleading you. So we're doing several things. So first of all, we are bringing in additional resource to the YORhub team. There's been a few new members arriving the team recently. And we're also looking to build some resilience within the framework as well by bringing in more junior members of staff who we're going to train up to the future, who will eventually replace us older members as we retire. So we're trying to grow the framework in terms of its resources. We're also trying to, as part of that, make sure that we grow the training of the younger members of the team as well, to make sure that they are continuing what we think has been a really good service, and you know, the excellence of procurement advice that we've been offering to clients, and to make sure that as the frameworks continue to evolve over the years, that the people coming in and running the frameworks in the future are also able to continue with that level of high quality service that we know we all need. So there is lots of work going on to do that. But in the meantime, we know that you want a rapid response. We will try very, very hard to give you that rapid response. If you think it's not happening, chase us, because we will provide you with the service that you need. But feedback's important. So we've recognized that we need to get quicker, and we've addressed that through the framework. The next one is on value for money. So we often get asked, how much does it cost to procure through the framework? And the other thing that gets raised is it's cheaper to procure through other frameworks. They don't charge us a fee at all. We are local authorities providing frameworks for other local authorities. That's our unique brand. It's what we're all about. So first of all, other frameworks that don't tell you they don't charge a fee is not true. That is a myth I can bust now. There is a fee to every framework. It is just simply hidden somewhere within the framework. Now, we're transparent about that. We also have a fee, and it is included within our contractors' fee percentages. But what we have done is we have benchmarked our framework fees against our competitors, and we've made sure that we are aligned or better than everybody else. Because we're a local authority, we are not a private framework. We are not seeking to make loads of profit on this and make huge surpluses. Everything that we generate goes back into reinvesting in the framework. So any costs that we recover, we reinvest them in the framework for procurement of new frameworks and later generations of frameworks and improvements in the framework. So we know that our fees are a lot cheaper than our competitors, and that's one of the main selling points of the framework, really, is that this is local authority frameworks for local authorities by local authorities, and we understand what value for money means to you. We understand the cost pressures that you're under, because we're under exactly the same cost pressures. So nobody wants to be shelling out six-figure sums to a private framework for a procurement that you can procure through a public sector framework like ours, when the fees are a fraction of that. We've also been asked whether we can support users in determining value for money when you're doing the new direct awards. The answer to that is yes, we can. When we've gone through the tendering process with the contractors, we've established rate cards for things like preliminary items, for fees, and design and build fees as well. So we've got all that data, we've got all that information, and we can use that information to support you in determining if you want to make a direct award, to help you make sure that you can justify that is value for money. Okay, thanks, Mike.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Chris. I think the other thing that also on that is because you know we're run by, or we're led by 4 lead authorities, and we obviously work with I think over the years we work with round numbers of 100 or so clients in the region. Where you've got a question on a particular project, that we do have a lot of contacts that we can get access to, and I think of one I had a few weeks back, and I reached out to Chris, and Chris gave me some really good wording to address a certain issue. So you know we've got that sort of large sort of network of people to lean on, so that we can help with. Is your scheme suitable for YORhub? I mean, one of the things I'd like to say on this is, you know, we will be fully honest with you. You know, if a scheme we don't think does work, then and sometimes people use us for a particular reason, time constraints, that kind of issue. But if we don't think that we're the best answer for you, we will say that. And if you've got concerns over a potential scheme, you know, again, a lot of the feedback was, it's a shame that we can't procure this through YORhub, or it's obviously not suitable for that sort of building. And in many cases, it has been used for exactly that sort of building, but maybe by a different authority than yourselves. If you've got thoughts about maybe this scheme might be suitable or maybe it won't be, talk to us. You know, we're happy to give you examples. If there's similar schemes that have been procured, we'll give you that detail. We're happy to facilitate early engagement with suppliers. That was something that I quite commonly do, is contacting all of the suppliers in a relevant lot and saying, can you give me some your experience of this type of scheme? Quite often we get, you know, we do that to get a little bit of additional information for yourself. So maybe you might have a feasibility report for a potential scheme. We can go to our suppliers and say, right, here's the scheme. What do you think of the key risks? Maybe even give us a budget value, you know, for the works. All of this is zero commitment to yourselves. You're not committed to use YORhub in any way. But you know, hopefully that will give you some kind of confidence that YORhub is the right answer or not. So we're very happy to do that. This slide is purely because what I wanted to try and do was do a list of what schemes have gone through YORhub, and I couldn't make it fit on a page because there's a lot of them. So that's just to kind of demonstrate. If you can think of it, we've probably procured it. I think the only thing we've maybe not done is a nuclear power station, but feel free to come and talk to us if you've got one.
Okay. Accessing YORhub again is a question that we get asked frequently. So a lot of clients they come to us and say, we've heard about your framework, we're really interested in your framework, how do you access it? So the point that I want to make is that this is really, really easy. We make it as easy as possible for you. So first of all, if you Google YORhub, you will find that we have a website for the framework. All of the information about the frameworks is on the YORhub website. What we also have is key information and contact details. So if you look on there, you can see fantastic photographs that are really awful of the framework managers and all their contact details below them, their email addresses, their phone numbers. So once you've availed yourself of what the framework is through the website and you've got a project that you want to put through the framework, speak to a framework manager, pick up the phone or drop them an email and engage with the framework manager, and the framework manager can walk you step by step through the process of accessing the frameworks. Once you've made your decision that you would like to proceed with the framework and carry out a procurement with us, we'll ask you to sign an access and confidentiality agreement. It doesn't bind you to anything other than acting confidentially about the project. It doesn't commit you to any fees or anything like that. It's just about privacy between the framework and yourselves. We then ask you to provide details of your project in a fairly simple form. A few pages. We'll ask you to give us as much information as possible because, as Mike said earlier in the presentation, as much information that we can get from you as early as possible means that we are better to engage with the suppliers on the framework, get their interest, get their feedback. So we ask you to give us some information about your project as much as possible. What we can then do is help you through the procurement process, and we can provide templates for procurement documents for carrying out a call off through the framework. Now, I have to stress that those are predominantly aimed at the NEC form of contract. That doesn't mean that you can't use your own forms of templates. You can, but if you need it, we can provide you with templates. And the advantage of using our templates is that they're all geared up for the procurement through the framework to make sure that you are procuring compliantly through the framework. Also, the suppliers are already very, very familiar with those templates. They've seen them time after time after time. They know what's in them. They understand what's being asked of them if you're using those templates. So we would strongly advocate using our templates if possible, but it's absolutely no barrier whatsoever to using your own, and you are free to do so. You can then carry out your procurement using your normal procurement routes, using the whatever portals you may use, and simply keep us up to date with your progress. We've got framework managers who will be in touch with you regularly. Keep our framework managers up to date with where you are going. But the thing to stress about this is we're here to help. If anything's not clear, pick up the phone, reach out. We will help you all the way. Any issues whatsoever, they're there. They're a resource to be used, and they really are the experts in all issues related to the framework. So they're a great resource. They're there to help you. Please reach out to them. But I can't stress enough, it's a very, very simple process to access any of the frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And yeah, and we're we're here to help. You know, I mean, my background as a project manager, I get regularly sort of called to go to see authorities or particular schemes to talk through possible procurement routes, contract strategies. We're on call to do that. Equally, if you and we do get authorities or individuals who are very much, I've got a really clear view, I know what I'm doing, I just want to access the framework and I want your templates, that's fine too. You know, we're not here to make you jump through lots of hoops. This is a little bit of a sort of key point about YORhub. I'm not going to go through these one by one, but sort of all these are genuine. You know, as Chris says, we're here as local authority procurement officers. We'll do our best for you. If we're not right for you, we'll tell you. We've got framework managers, or you know, we've got them in all of the lead authorities. In terms of the fee, yeah, you wouldn't, nothing, we wouldn't get paid anything until after a contract has been awarded. So up to that point, everything is basically zip, you know, free. We do a lot of free NEC training. So there's a number of us who are accredited NEC project managers, experienced in doing training. So we're always happy to come and do that, and we'll do it at different levels. So if you are interested in NEC but you've never used it before, we can do that. If it's, I've used NEC a few times and I want to focus on a particular area or a particular form of contract, we can do that too. We've also get requested to provide training on other topics. Procurement Act is one, project management methodologies is another one we've had requests on. We're happy to arrange and organise that training for you for free, because you know, if we don't have we have a lot of experience with it within the YORhub team. If we don't have it within the team, we'll reach out to our suppliers, and they will support us with the training as well. Yeah, I hope that's enough. Go on to Q&A then. I can see there's one in the list. So, must the supplier procure a subcontractor via the YORhub framework if they have been awarded under this same framework? I mean, the answer in terms of procuring subcontractors is no. They don't have to procure subcontractors through the framework. We do have a supply chain engagement program, because what, you know, ultimately as public sector professionals, you know, one of the things that we're always keen to try and do is try and see where we can get work ultimately to those SMEs, you know, in our region where possible, although recognizing sometimes the specialist works, that's not always the case. So we do operate and run this supply chain engagement program, which is more details on the YORhub website, to try and ensure that they have opportunities. But we beyond that, we would generally advise clients not to delve too deeply into influencing contractors' choices over who they appoint in terms of their supply chain. You should only be doing that if there's a genuine reason for using a certain subcontractor or a certain specialist. So the supply chain engagement program is very much to give local SMEs visibility of opportunities, but that's kind of where it ends. You know, the main your principal contractor has that responsibility for managing their supply chain. I believe that's everything that in terms of questions. If you do have any frantically, oh, I can see one's just gone open. As the clients, right, good to clarify this one. So in terms of the payment for the framework, so everything is captured within the supplier's rates. So that the rate that you get, that you'll see on our rate cards and comes to the tenders, that's the rate that you pay, and we get a very small portion of it. The suppliers do not pay anything to obtain a place on our frameworks, unlike some other frameworks. So we don't charge people to be a framework supplier. If you know, if they win the competition, they win the competition, to get awarded a place. So again, we feel that's unfair to make private sector companies pay to get onto our frameworks. And that's everything that we were planning to cover. By all means, again, we've said it a lot, but if you've got any questions about YORhub, about your particular schemes, even just ones about project management or about delivery, feel free to reach out. I'm very much sort of client advisor, so I'm out and about covering the whole suite of frameworks, and then when it comes into the bit more detailed about specific build or civils or consult, that's where our framework managers are very much the expert, and they'll take you through the process with as much support or as little as you need. But otherwise, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chris and Mike, for your myth busting. Hopefully that was useful for people. I'm sure it was. I just wanted to thank all our presenters today for all our speakers for the presentations, as well as everyone joining us online. Obviously, it wouldn't be a conference without that. Do hope you found them useful. We will be issuing feedback, so please do fill in the feedback. It's important to us because we take account of that when we're doing future events. And on this year's feedback, we will be asking about people's preference for a virtual conference, which we've gone for due to austerity on a number of authorities affecting their ability to be able to travel to events such as this one. We know there's some authorities who couldn't actually travel this year, which is why we've gone for a virtual one. But we're definitely interested in, do people prefer an in-person event, and if they do they have a preference on the venue? So that will be one of the questions on the feedback form. And also, as I said earlier, the slides from today's session on Tuesdays, they will be on the website, so we will be putting them up on YORhub website, so you will be able to see the full set of slides there from all our presentations. And just great seeing you all, even if it is virtually. Hopefully everyone's taken something away from today's conference. Thank you for your time. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.